Well, welcome to episode 7 of the Never Board of Trade podcast from the Brampton Board of Trade. I'm Jaipaul.
I'm Vijay.
And the podcast is brought to you by our amazing sponsors, the Brampton Honey Badgers, who just kicked off their 7th season yesterday at the CAA Center. And I got to take in the game. It was really cool. It was mixed emotions for me. The Honey Badgers lost, but they lost to the Scarborough team, which is where I'm originally from. So I was, I felt like I won either way, or lost either way, depending on how you looked at it.
There you go.
Yeah,
the Shooting Stars.
The Shooting Stars. That's right. And it was a really cool game, and I recommend you get. I know we have an event coming up in a few weeks, but if you're looking for like a fun, afternoon or evening out, the product on the floor is really great. There's a player this year, Quadri Weatherspoon, who is a former NBA player, was formerly on the Spurs, and before that on the 2022 Warriors championship team. So we've got a guy with a ring playing for the Honey Badgers this year. And the team as a whole, I think there's 3 players from Brampton. It's so it's got a little bit of a hometown flavor, a little bit of a pro flavor. It was a really, really good experience. I highly recommend you get out there. And to all our viewers and listeners, highly recommend you go out there and support our local professional basketball team here from the CEBL.
And speaking of basketball, have you been keeping up with the NBA playoffs?
I have, and I don't know if my nerves can take anymore. All my predictions. I used to think I was good at predicting sports.
Yeah,
I've given up this season. How about whether it's the Pacers coming? Everyone's coming back from every record of no one's ever come back from this deficit. No one's ever come back with this little time on the clock. Seems to have been broken this year. I don't know which team to root for anymore. They're all good stories.
Yeah.
How about you?
No, it's that's the thing. These are all teams that are relatively young. They've seen recent success. They're not sort of storied franchises, and it's exciting. I'm glad Shea got the MVP. A Canadian talent.
Have you been checking out this on the Canadian talent side? It's very bittersweet watching this New York Indiana series, because both OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam are killing it. Pascal in particular, 39 points the last game.
Yeah. And
there's a real flavor between that and then Fred VanVleet in the Houston series. There's a lot of what coulda, shoulda been for the Raptors in this year's playoffs.
I'm super happy to see them succeed.
All brilliant guys. Norm Powell, there's a bunch of them that had great playoffs that all came from Toronto.
Totally.
It just kind of sucks to see them killing it in other franchises right now.
And I saw this on social media, but apparently since 2019, obviously the Raptors championship, there has not been these many sort of distinct champions.
That's right. This will be the 7th year in a row that they've there's going to be a new champion, which is, I think, the first time since the 70s. I think something like this. So it's a crazy run for parity in the NBA.
Amazing.
And which is great. So hopefully, if you're a fan base like Toronto, it means that there is still hope. That's not just a given that dynasties will dominate the playoffs forever and ever.
There you go.
But it's been a fun playoff to watch for sure.
Cool.
But I've given up on predicting anything.
It's a fool's errand. Yeah.
It is. Well, speaking of fool's errands, we
the
conversation we wanted to have today was about engaging and trying to understand strategically where our various levels of government, our newly formed governments, are going. Over the last several episodes of the podcast, we've been talking about things like a new cabinet coming together provincially, obviously navigating the federal election and a cabinet now being appointed federally. Over the past several weeks, therefore, there's been some engagement from the Board of Trade at various levels, Queen's Park days, meetings with MPs and so forth. We're settling in maybe to a period where we're less about reacting to what's happening, maybe more so trying to set the tone for what's to come. We'd love to hear from you, sort of what are some of the things we're doing, and talk about what advocacy means at an organization like a Board of Trade.
Yeah, no, it's a good point and good context setting, because I think it wasn't until last week when we had our BEAs, which is our biggest event of the year, that I feel like we can breathe a little bit and kind of think more longer term about strategy, and we can reflect a little bit. As you said, we've been very responsive or reactive, depending on the moment, but there's a provincial election, then a federal election, one after the other, and we've been just... Even the content of these podcasts have been sort of very effervescent, very sort of driven by the moment and the news story. But now we can kind of think about, okay, well, philosophically, where do we stand? What are our advocacy issues as Parliament resumes today federally, and the King is doing the speech from the throne and all of that. So, we're thinking about sort of going back to our business confidence index,
Yeah.
right, that we did last year and years prior. We're looking back on conversations we've had with members and with some of our partners, and we participated. We are participating in a number of Queen's Park Advocacy Days. I attended the Ontario Chamber of Commerce Advocacy Day tomorrow. I'm attending the Advocacy Day that is organized by the Better Way Alliance.
That's right. Yeah.
Our friends over there. And next week, I think you're doing an advocacy day as well.
That's correct. Yeah, one of our university partners engaging with, same idea, just engaging with folks at Queen's Park provincially. That's right, around their priorities.
And the idea behind these advocacy days, I think it's really great because we get an opportunity to go to Queen's Park where these elected officials are doing their business essentially, and we get to meet with folks and really share what we are prioritizing as community institutions, and we get to sort of relay what our members are telling us to folks who are in power, both cabinet and opposition folks, and really push the progress on some of these important files. Right. We've talked a lot about two-way all-day go as an idea. There's been a lot that's happened in the past few weeks around tariffs and all of that. That is still top of mind for me. Yeah. So tomorrow, I'm really hoping that I can drive that point home to everyone at Queen's Park to really articulate the business case for a project like that. Affordable housing is another a huge piece that cuts through every level of government, and we're working on a number of recommendations for City Hall around bringing more housing diversity to Brampton, but also recognizing that municipalities are cash-strapped, and to be able to deliver the infrastructure needed for housing requires a lot of money. And to that end, we've introduced a policy resolution at the Ontario Chamber AGM,
cost sharing,
around land transfer taxes being shared with the municipalities and so on. And then the last piece is sort of the behemoth issue. It's immigration. Yeah. And this is a skills issue. It's a labor issue. It's also an issue that affects our post-secondary partners quite acutely as well. And there's both a federal and a provincial component to this, right? We have engaged actually one MP so far, but we're slowly working through all of the Brampton MPs and really articulating that the last federal government, I think, made certain decisions around immigration. We're hoping that this federal government can be more consultative with industry and make decisions that don't put our post-secondary partners in a state of precarity as well. Yeah. And then at the provincial level, it's really the post-secondary emphasis that we're sharing with our provincial counterparts. So, that's sort of in a nutshell where I'm thinking of taking things. But yeah.
Well, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. So your role here is defined as policy and government relations. Yeah. And I guess maybe for those who engage and work with us on a day-to-day basis, they may have some familiarity with that. They may sit on our Policy and Government Relations Committee or some of the task forces, or engage historically with some of the positions we've taken around transit, healthcare, skills development, and others, the ones you've described here. I think I would love to use some of the time that we have today, because we don't have a pressing issue for the first time in a little while. Yeah. There is no election to respond to. There is no budget about to drop. There is no thing about to happen, to really dig in a little bit deeper about the how and why we go about what it is that we do. So I'd love to use this opportunity to hear a little bit more from you and give people the opportunity to understand a little bit more. You talked about some of these key issues and some of the actions we're taking, but maybe let's break this into two chunks. A little bit about what it is that advocacy at a Board of Trade looks like. What is it that we're looking to achieve, and how we go about doing that. And then those issues you described. I don't think anyone would push back and say those aren't important issues, but maybe let's have a little bit of a conversation about how we landed on those issues. You touched on things like surveys and so forth, but I'd love to go a little bit deeper just to give people the opportunity to understand how we decide what it is we're going to put our energy and attention into as well. And in particular, so they understand how they can contribute to those conversations, or if there's a conversation that perhaps we should be having that they feel we're not, how they can raise that with us. So if you're cool with that.
Sure, let's do it.
Let's talk a little bit about your job. So policy, advocacy, government relations, what does that look like at a Board of Trade? What are the objectives that we're trying to achieve here in your mind?
Yeah, it's there are several elements to this. The first is that policy and government relations are two related but distinct
Mhm.
ideas. Policy, in my view, relates to any sort of directive from government,
Mhm.
and it is really around shaping. It's really a discussion around good ideas,
Yeah.
and the policy pipeline, if you will. It starts in what we call civil society,
Yeah.
right? That's all of us talking about the issues, and the Brampton Board of Trade and other sort of civil society
Sure.
institutions.
Metamorphosis Network,
Yes,
some of these other community agencies that we work with. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. It really starts with us, incubating some of these
Mhm.
ideas and working through some of the research and getting the numbers and statistics, and defining a policy idea,
Mhm.
whether it's a recommendation, a resolution. These are all sort of more or less synonymous, and that could be something specifically, which is to increase or decrease a tax,
Sure.
for let's say, or to invest X amount of dollars in this project, right?
Sure. Like say an LRT.
An LRT as an example. And once we have these sort of these ideas,
Mhm.
um, it's incumbent upon us to pursue a mechanism to communicate these ideas to those that we elect.
Right.
And this is where government relations comes in, right? Some folks use the term lobbying, or,
Yeah.
small L lobbying, if you will, and that's it's related. Government relations essentially is do you have relationships with those who are in government or
Right.
those who are in legislature?
Yeah.
And policy and advocacy relies on those relationships to be able to advance those ideas.
Right.
Yeah.
And when you talk about those in government, just to expand again, just for those who are
Yeah.
listening, that doesn't always just mean those who are elected, correct? That means
Yeah.
those who are in the bureaucracy. It also means those who are in government agencies, like
That's right.
like a Metrolinx, for instance.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. There's the political side of
Yeah.
government, and then there's sort of the implementation side,
Yeah.
right? Which is bureaucracy. To your point, these crown agencies
Yeah.
and so on and so forth. They're also a piece of the puzzle
Yeah.
because they're in charge of policy implementation, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, the Brampton Board of Trade, that we sort of we have this dance between both policy and
Yeah.
advocacy, more or less, and government relations,
Yeah.
broadly speaking. I rely quite heavily on our PGR, Policy and Government Relations Committee.
Mhm.
This is a group of volunteers who share their time on the first Thursday of every month, and we meet virtually and we discuss some of these ideas.
Yeah.
And we have an open forum where we occasionally have presentations from folks. We ask questions. We share updates on the news of the day, and this is the space where the conversation happens. And I take fastidious notes, I hope, and I understand a little bit of what this group is where they land on certain issues,
Yeah.
and what they see as important. And this is a really important place where you and I understand where to put our energy.
Yeah.
This is not the only place, right? This is one of many different sources. The BCI, the Business Confidence Index, which I mentioned, is also it's a survey where we ask our members, folks in the community,
Yeah.
what's important to them. This is also a good indicator of where we should put our energy.
Yeah.
And if the second hospital or a cancer care center or a new highway or what have you, we sort of try and assign a sort of a rank priority to
Yeah.
some of these issues. But it's not perfect, and so we supplement this with stakeholder engagement,
Yeah.
right? Which is essentially conversations with folks
Yeah.
and roundtables, and going for coffees with our partners, our members,
Yeah.
to understand again what do they prioritize and where they're putting their energy. And you and I have been sort of working on this a little bit,
Yeah.
but I think it's important for us to determine what do we take on as a policy issue, right? We've talked a lot about the LRT for the past several months.
Yeah.
Two-way all day go, affordable housing. How do we determine that this is important? Well, as I mentioned, a combination of these committee meetings, combination of this stakeholder engagement, BCI, but we also have to ask ourselves, is there anybody else who's doing this better than us?
Yeah.
Right? If there's an issue like the Metamorphosis Network, right? they're advocating to get a fair share for the Peel region around community service funding.
That's right.
This is an issue where we can endorse them and support them, and where applicable, provide resources that help buttress their messaging.
Yeah.
But we don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? They're doing a very good job of this. We don't need to necessarily duplicate efforts.
That's right.
On that issue in particular. But around some of the more sort of community-centered advocacy issues around the LRT, 2A All Day Go, we've noticed that Brampton doesn't really have a ton of civic infrastructure.
Sure.
To
no one's taking the lead on that particular issue. Yeah,
exactly. So that's a big criterion
Yeah.
for us to determine what a policy issue that we should champion should be.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I think that's an important distinction to make for people who are listening.
Yeah.
Is recognize, because people often will come to us and say this is an issue,
Yeah.
and this needs to be dealt with, and oftentimes my answer is yeah, it 100% is, but it's not always our issue, and in some cases, to your point,
Yeah.
if there are already those who are better equipped, whether it be through research, resources, or just insight or connections,
Yeah.
to make a higher impact, then yeah, let's put our support behind them. I think the Metamorphosis Network is a great example of that.
Yeah.
They are just much more deep thinkers around this specific issue,
Yeah.
among organizations who've put in a lot of time and are among those agencies who have had that historical underfunding, so they can
Totally.
speak firsthand
Yes.
to the pain
Exactly.
in a way that we can't.
Yeah.
So yeah, why would we do anything except try to put our support behind them? And the other thing that we try to do with our Board of Trade stage is shine a light on the work that they do.
Yes.
So
exactly.
we used our State of the Region, we used our debates, for instance, to make sure people from the Metamorphosis Network were engaged as panelists,
Yeah.
because it's an opportunity to bring forth Metamorphosis issues. So we try to be collaborative.
Yeah.
To your point, there are other issues where no one is the obvious stakeholder to lead,
Yeah.
and the transit being one of them. Let's let the Board of Trade do that, and us be the ones who build the coalition.
Absolutely.
So I like that as sort of some of the check boxes we use to figure out. The one I wonder about sometimes, and I love your opinion on it.
Yeah.
You and I haven't talked about this in the past.
Okay.
Is like how quixotic are we about this, or like does it matter that we think we can win? What does an outcome look like for us that feels like this is like in I guess what I'm trying to say in a better phrasing is our likelihood to make an impact part of the calculus we use to determine whether it's a priority issue, or do we pursue an issue because it's an issue that needs pursuing?
That's
in your mind.
Yeah.
I know my answer, but you and I have not talked about this before.
Yeah. You're right. We haven't talked about this. I think my instinct is to say, regardless of whether or not it's an easy win,
Yeah.
if it's an issue worth supporting or advocating, my proclivity is to champion it.
Yeah.
Or at least talk about it.
Yeah.
And I think there are certain areas that I think are sort of like no brainers, and I think I don't see, like, if it meets all the criteria, let's say, let's champion it.
Yeah.
But in terms of like what's a good example, I guess.
Well, if I can help you, for me,
Sure,
one of those
yeah.
things potentially is tariffs, for
Tariffs,
instance,
yeah.
right? So it's a top of mind issue for me because tariffs are something that people want to talk about all the time.
Yeah.
And I understand the pressures on local businesses, and we want to make sure that the voice of local business are being heard, and the impacts of these tariff conversations that are happening at various levels of government are being processed, or at least are being informed as best they can be by the experience of those at the regional, local levels.
Yeah.
So, I think it's important that people hear the story of Business X in Brampton when considering what our tariff response is going to be. I am not of the belief that one story in Brampton is going to shift anything as it pertains to the conversations that are happening between the Canadian government and President Trump.
Yes.
We're not changing an outcome here, but I believe nevertheless it's important to tell it because in aggregate, we're adding pebbles to something that could become a wall if it's if we're all working consistently and diligently.
Totally.
So that might be like, to me, that's one of those pieces where it's like, why are you putting a bunch of effort in the tariffs? I don't think we're going to change anything really,
Yeah.
but we may play a role in influencing prioritization or the response that is going to be fought for by those who actually are empowered to make change in a way that ultimately may have some positive effect for local business. That's one of those ones that I think about in that context. For
Totally.
instance.
That's a good example. Yeah. And I think the tariff issue is one of those where, to your point, I mean, these are deliberated ultimately it's going to be folks in Washington, D.C. that's going to, move the needle on this. And there are folks with far greater resources than you and I who are doing the lobbying here. That being said, it is a business issue, right? Like it would be kind of like surreal if we just ignored tariffs entirely, right? But yeah, it sometimes I struggle with the tariff one because there, what can I say? Just convince Donald Trump to lower the tariffs, like obviously, right? But I think there are some opportunities to actually contribute meaningfully in the sense that you've done a lot of this work, but talking to our members, understanding these anecdotes, as you say, and also kind of articulating the story. And I think that to me is it's not the formal advocacy that we do with the LRT or 2A All Day Go, but it is. I think we said this in a previous podcast, but we're in the storytelling business or story writing business. And that's all part of that. Right?
Yeah, and I totally agree, and that's why again we didn't talk about it in advance, but I'm sort of the same position as you. Is that even if the potential for us to make an outcome is vague or low, I still think something is worth pursuing if it's the right thing to do on behalf of, and particularly if it tells the story of local business here, because we don't know in aggregate how that may contribute. And the reality is at least in my observation, so many of these issues evolve and go through twists and turns over time. And the LRTs are great when you talk about how much effort we've put in the past several months. But this is an issue that precedes either one of us being involved as staff in the Board of Trade. You and I were both involved as community members 10 years ago. But that's how long that this has been an issue in our community. And through that time, the solutions that are being offered, the individuals who need to be engaged, to your point, that advocacy piece, who we advocate to and what we're advocating for, has gone through many iterations. And so, I do think there's value in just championing a cause because it's the right cause, without knowing for sure where the impact's going to be made, because the journey is a winding one. And we may find that there may not be an obvious place for us or an obvious impact that we can make on day one, but we may find through the journey, having been there at the beginning, having built the coalition, having had the opportunity to develop our own expertise, quite frankly, in the issue by immersing ourselves in it, that we're able to make bigger contributions down the road. And I think the LRT is one of those ones where the Board of Trade was really outspoken at the beginning. And then the issue itself went through a real lull in terms of community engagement because it really became something that was being handled by the various levels of bureaucracy, provincially, municipally, and somewhat federally. And then it sort of circled back around again to being a conversation for public engagement once the city had enough reporting to say, okay, we got to make some decisions. And so there was an opportunity once again for voices to be raised. And I think we were ready to raise that voice when the time came. So,
and there was a specific point of advocacy, as I kind of call it.
No, good point. The mechanism. I like your term mechanism.
The mechanism, which is that in Budget 2024, the provincial governments kind of preliminarily said that they will support this project. They didn't say the design option. They didn't say how much money. So that kind of put us all into gear to advocate for cost sharing at the federal level, for the tunnel option as championed by the city of Brampton itself. So there was sort of a resurgence of advocacy around this issue because this Budget 2024 contained the LRT extension to Brampton. So
right.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and just a few things came to mind as you were speaking. I talk about this a lot with folks who are in this space, and I think there's a real frustration around the speed of advocacy among the general population.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. That's an important one, and it's funny. So I'll let you talk. Then I have a perspective to bring on that too.
Sure. And I get that. I think that's real frustration. When we were celebrating the LRT announcements, both I on social media, the one of the most common comments was, "Okay, well, when will this actually be built?"
Sure,
right? Or why did it take 10 years or whatever? And the thing is, I think advocacy is messy because you're dealing with personalities and politics and all of that. And if everything lined up perfectly and everything could be swift and speedy, that would be ideal, but we do not live in that world. And sometimes you kind of, the alternative is nothing happens, right? The alternative is inaction, and that is profoundly unacceptable. So if we can't get perfect, then we got to take our wins as we get them. And this, if you're in it, you understand that work is being done every day to move the needle, and just because it's not making headlines just yet doesn't mean that massive amounts of progress aren't being made. Right. And so I think it's important to have that perspective that, things might take a long time or feel like they take a long time, but sometimes we're just waiting for this sort of critical moment, and then we get this sort of flood of progress that we've been waiting for 10 years. Right. So anyway, what's your perspective on that?
No, I agree, and what I was going to say, sort of as the anecdote that goes along with that, the version of that I have lived and talked to people about regularly. It's not just that piece around the speed at which things move. I hear that one all the time as well. But one of my jobs is in my role is the engagement with our board. And, we have members who come into our board and are chairs of our board, and they serve for a period of a year. Myself, as a past chair, serve for a period of a year. And you come in with the idea that people volunteer at organizations like this because they want to make a difference. And one of the conversations you have almost every time when someone's coming into a chair position, a leadership position, and as a volunteer is, and so here's what I want to see happen this year. And one of the conversations you have to have every time, and I had to learn it myself 10 years ago, was that's awesome. And that we really want to channel that energy, but recognize that, the way advocacy works seldom has a clean beginning, middle, and end.
Exactly.
And that we are, the analogy I often use is that we're all just links in a chain. And we will be able to claim credit sometimes for the work that people well ahead of us, preceded us, will have laid the foundations for. And then to your point, it sprouts at just the right time, and we were there to be the people to receive some of that credit. Maybe we get to pose in the picture for the thing that happened, recognizing that we did just a small piece at the end. And similarly, we will be laying foundation stones for things that people that come well after you and I will later get the credit for.
They'll be at the ribbon cutting.
100%. And we may not be that. I may be dead by the time the ribbon gets cut, but that's okay, because you have to do it because it's all along this sort of longer continuum. And then to your point that it happens at the pace at which it happens. Sometimes circumstances well beyond even just the issue itself have to line up in order to create the circumstances for the change to happen, whether that be budget, whether that be political will, whether that be leadership, and all the things you've talked about. One of the things that we haven't mentioned is that among the changes that we cannot control is that of change in government.
Exactly.
And their priorities and how they change. And, so there's so much outside of our control. All you can do is be consistent and be adaptive to the circumstances around you, recognizing that someone later may get the value out of this. I just have to have faith that what we're doing is contributing to a conversation that will be a productive conversation over time. I just may not be the one that's there to yield the fruits of that conversation.
And the work of advocacy can't be done by the perpetually pessimistic, right?
Oh no, it requires ridiculous optimism.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I think I completely agree with you. I think part of it too is I kind of get a little bit frustrated with the kind of how do I say, let's say the incessant comparison to the sort of corporate way of doing things, which is, because there's a bottom line, the private sector is associated with efficiency and speed, and that's not necessarily true, right? There are a lot of corporations that are essentially like government bureaucracies.
100%.
But at the same time, the stakes are different, right? Because building a second hospital or a cancer care center, the implications of that are a lot different than how many widgets you sell, right? And these are human problems, and there are real risks around litigation, right? And that's why you get sort of this bureaucratic kind of, you get sort of that government bureaucracy mindset that people sort of revile, but it's because you sort of layer on top all these different risks, and as advocates, we are navigating through that sort of minefield, right?
I agree. I think one of the things that we have the unique opportunity to do, though, is because we're not government,
Yes.
and because we're not necessarily part of the bureaucracy, and because we have this lovely spot that we sit in where we engage with business, but also those who are in the innovation space and other types of entities to advocate for innovation and disruption where it can happen.
Totally.
I was recently able to speak at this panel around traffic and congestion, this conference a couple weeks ago, and one of the things that was brought forward by the panel was, what is that balance point between the bureaucracy and doing things in that governmental way versus working with small business. And I was there to sort of be the voice of small business, and so it gave me an opportunity to reflect and really talk about this idea that's really been in my mind that you sort of touched on here. And that is, if you're talking about transit and traffic and congestion on a systems level, that has to be in the hands of the bureaucracy. That has to be in the hands of subject matter experts who work within government, who have the resources to plan properly, who have the education and the training to plan properly, and who therefore have the ability to, and have the discipline to do the things like community engagement and environmental studies and all these things that add time and add time and add time, because you're building systems that are going to be generational projects that support the development of a city and how goods and people move within it. But when you can create space for innovation within that, and the example I used was, one of our members in a business that incubated here in Brampton was that of a Scooty.
Yeah.
So at no point did the folks in planning and transit here in the city say, what we really need is a micromobility solution to make that all happen.
Yeah.
But by creating a space for a micromobility solution, and there's a few here in town, but Scooty is one who we know very well. They created a network here of scooters that help people, move within all these sort of interstitial spaces that transit doesn't go. And by collecting that data and mapping that data and sharing that data back with the city, was able to point out, hey, here's a whole bunch of other things that we can teach you about transit. What does that last and first kilometer look like? How are people getting to these buses? When are people actually utilizing systems? You only see when the buses are being used and not used. What are people doing all those other times? And creating all this other information that has in turn gone back and influenced the bureaucratic, standardized systems-based approach. So I share it just to say there has to be a give and take. I actually don't think it's a one or the other.
No.
It should all be run like a business. You're right. You sacrifice safety, you sacrifice oversight, you sacrifice accountability for the bottom line potentially. But it can't all be run as a system either, and bureaucracy. There's when you have a little bit of both, you find this lovely give and take. And I think that's a place where we can actually bring novel solutions to the fore and say, I love that this project is working this way. We have some members, or we're talking to other boards of trades and other municipalities, and here's an innovation or an insight that we think can have some value in Brampton. And I think that's a place beyond just raising the issues in the traditional advocacy way, where we can actually be quite additive through the perspective of innovation.
Completely. And I echo and endorse the sort of the nimbleness of this organization and others like it to be able to, again, move the needle on advocacy priorities, because that's essentially sometimes, because of this sort of calcified bureaucratic thinking, sometimes it needs sort of that exogenous kind of force to move it into a particular direction. That's what Donald Trump's tariffs were, right? When it came to interprovincial trade.
He would argue by design, but by accident. But
fair. But no, I completely agree. And there is, I mentioned her on this podcast before, but Mariana Mazzucato.
I am working through her book right now.
Yeah, excellent.
Thanks to you.
Okay.
Thanks to you.
The Entrepreneurial State?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. And it's essentially articulating what you just described, right? And she goes through all of these great sort of innovations from the internet, as a byproduct of Bell Labs, and the iPhone, and as GPS being for military use originally, and all that. All of these great innovations have relied on significant public investment, and public subsidy in fundamental R&D in particular. And I completely agree that the private sector works best if there is a sort of public infrastructure around it to help it thrive. Yeah. Anyway, so that's great.
Yeah. And on that thought, the last piece, and this is just potential another advocacy item for us as we get there, is how do we retain that investment?
Yes.
I was at a lunch just earlier today and speaking to someone who's got, it's an anecdote, take it for what it is, but I know there's enough data out there that you and I have both seen that makes this story a truth more than just a tale. And that is, I'm an individual who's got two sons, currently both at University of Waterloo doing computer science right now. One graduated last year, decided to go back and do a master's because the job prospects weren't what they wanted them to be.
Yeah.
The other one's on the cusp of graduation. They're both being heavily recruited. And where are they looking? Into the United States.
Yeah.
Because that's where their opportunity to use their skills and their trade is going to be. These are individuals who have benefited through being publicly educated, all the way through in Canada, whether that be high school and elementary school, right into universities. And universities in Canada are public institutions. We are subsidizing the cost of these individuals, developing their skills and all the intellectual capacity they have, and then they're going to go and monetize that in the U.S. And why is that? Because we've not created the circumstances for those individuals to capitalize on that investment here in Canada. So talking about, that advocacy piece, we have to find that point where, there's a tension between, a fruitful tension between private industry and the bureaucracy. It also has to be one in where the bureaucracy is able to reap the rewards that come from the investments in the private industry that help it get there. To your point, we are subsidizing so many of these industries, whether we realize it or not. Yeah. But in many ways, we just squander that capacity. So it's a bit of a tangent, but I wonder if that's increasingly is becoming a topic on my mind that is rising higher and higher.
Absolutely. And with these, the Canadian Harvard students in particular,
yes,
we'll see if a portion of them, have to. But we'll see.
I will say, whatever is happening between this and then the crackdown on professors, this has got to be the best recruitment pitch for the University of Toronto, University of Waterloo, McGill, Queens. This is their benefit. Absolutely, the Canadian Ivies are definitely going to be benefiting from a lot of this.
That's right. That's right. No, absolutely a good point. I wanted to return to something you mentioned earlier around the Board of Trade and what we've historically supported and, where we can take credit.
Yeah.
You mentioned something at the BEAs that I think it was really powerful, first of all, and I think it's worth commenting on this in this podcast as well. But a big issue that you mentioned was the Peel Memorial Hospital and our community almost losing that hospital. Yeah. And the role that the Brampton Board of Trade played. I think that is an example of an advocacy win for the Brampton Board of Trade. Do you mind re-articulating that?
Sure, I'll try not to get quite as emotional here as I did that night on Thursday night.
That's right.
But certainly no, and for those who aren't familiar, the story I was trying to tell more than anything else was that Peel Memorial was started 100 years ago. It's celebrating their 100th anniversary this year. About to become, once Brampton's hospital lost that status and about to become Brampton's second hospital as reinvestment is resulting in it getting the resources to function in that manner. Was founded by a group of 12 women as part of an auxiliary group who just saw the need in their community. And the story I was trying to emphasize that night was, that of, the remarkable capacity of a small group of people with a vision to make a difference. Yeah. And really trying to draw the point home that, if you look around the room, most people were sitting in tables of, 9 to 12 people. Like that's a start of something incredible. And if you consider what that looked like, among the 450 people in the room or the thousands of people in an organization like a Brampton Board of Trade, our capacity to do something as community is remarkable. Yeah. But one of the things I told along the way of the story and what you're referencing is in the early 2000s, there was some defunding, particularly when Brampton Civic was coming online. And it looked like the province was about to shutter Peel Memorial at that time, because it was felt that only one hospital was sufficient and a big investment was being made to develop Brampton Civic. Yeah. And a lot of people, not a lot, but a few people had the real insight to understand that was a terrible decision to take action on, which resulted in a lot of people getting engaged. And the Brampton Board of Trade led a Save Peel Memorial campaign, which was led at that time by our chair at that time, Linda Ford, and a few of our past board members and presidents, most notably Maria Brito and Brian Dawson, both of whom were in attendance that night, along with some other prominent Bramptonians, Neil Davis and others, John Kurtzola, Bill Kananopoulos, who was our honoree for our Business Person of the Year. And they really put that effort together to start a door-to-door campaign, to start fundraising small dollar amounts among the business community, but creating a groundswell of information and activity by local community to start putting pressure on Queen's Park to save the hospital and to make sure that it received the funding it needed to remain open. And it was a long campaign. It took several years for it to play out in full. But it resulted ultimately in the hospital being maintained. Now, it did, well, again, wasn't hospital status. That morph became the Peel Memorial Urgent Care Center and other elements. But the point being is the building and its resources remained intact. And the citizens of Brampton had a second acute care and emergency care area in Brampton, which we otherwise would have lost.
Yeah.
And which is then the foundation for what's about to become a full second hospital, as quite frankly, we launch our push for a third hospital, recognizing the growth at which Brampton was growing, and at the pace at which Brampton is growing, rather. So I don't know if there's another element to that story you wanted me to tell, but to me, those are sort of the key elements there, right? That something remarkable started from a small group of people really having the vision for where their community was going. And when it was at risk of being lost, again, a small group of people, but with vision and purpose, were able to activate the larger community around them. And I was a member at the time of this campaign. And so it wasn't just rah, wave flags up. There was all the stuff that we talk about with advocacy. The business case was made. The numbers were run. Engagement with the LINs and other mechanisms and institutions that govern healthcare regionally were part of the process. An individual was identified to become the leader of the healthcare network here, Matt Baker at that time, with a lot of push from the Board of Trade to make sure that his mandate included revitalizing that Peel Memorial site. So there was influence was placed when people were hired, data was collected, it was informational and driven, and then there was all the door knocking, hat passing and all that kind of stuff, and really made some really big changes happen. So a real blueprint, I think, for what advocacy could look like, in the traditional ways and the non-traditional ways for a Board of Trade to get involved.
I love that story, and I love how beautifully it sort of paints this picture of effective advocacy at work. And there was urgency around the potential shuttering of Peel Memorial, but that's essentially, in a nutshell, kind of what we are trying to do with all of these different policy areas that are important to us. And I think what you mentioned it as well, but I think what's really beautiful about that is it has been the Peel Memorial has been an operational urgent care center for a number of years. It is now going to be the site of our second hospital. Yeah. Can you imagine if Peel Memorial was demolished? Yeah. We would be starting from zero.
Well, the site, no doubt, would have been developed into a retail complex or a plaza. Like, it's not even the foundation of the hospital would have been lost. We probably wouldn't even have the site anymore, quite frankly. We wouldn't have the space to put that hospital there.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. I think that's a great anecdote to wrap up on.
No, I think it's fantastic. So in terms of what's next, you mentioned we got a couple Queen's Park Advocacy Days. Anything else that you're working on that you want to share with our listeners for an upcoming podcast or things to keep an eye on?
Totally. So as Jaipaul mentioned, we had these two elections, the provincial and the federal election, back to back. There's also a municipal election that we're that is confirmed, let's say, in fall 2026. We know the date of that, and we don't have to do this guesswork. So we really want to be proactive in our engagement on the municipal front. And this fall, it will be 1 year until the municipal election, and we're really doing some thinking this summer around what is our election strategy, and how can we engage not just our members but the broader community, and really improve civic engagement and help at least do our part in providing the material and the literacy resources necessary to be able to make informed decisions at the polls, and that involves hearing from folks, understanding what is important to them in terms of policy issues. And that allows us to then engage our city council, our current city council and current mayor, to do some engagement around these issues in the lead up to the municipal election. So it's really when we say being proactive, we really want to set the agenda for this upcoming campaign.
Yeah, I know, and I think I was just gonna, in my head, I was like, you had a nicer way of saying it, but saying the same thing. I think it's what we have is the opportunity here is quite frankly to tell the candidates what the issues are going to be.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
I think in a federal election and provincial election, for a whole bunch of reasons, including just the breadth of constituents that are involved, the Brampton voice can only go so far. And I think the Brampton voice goes pretty far.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, we have to balance out our needs in Ontario with northern and other regions, and in Canada with entire other provinces. But here, we can really define the issues.
Yeah.
And I don't mean in a way that's you and I thinking it up, or even with our PGR committee, through the way you're describing, through engagement, through conversation, but making sure that as many disparate voices are able to be heard, and not leaving it to 2 or 3 individuals to set the tone for what's going to be discussed, because they said it and everyone else has to respond to it.
Yeah.
And I think the earlier we start on that work, the more effective we'll be in ensuring that whoever it is elected at least has to go through the test of being able to answer how they're going to respond to these key issues, and what they intend to do if elected on these key issues. And I think us creating this model, or process, maybe is the better word, for accountability, I think is going to be a huge contribution that we can make in this upcoming year. And I'm really keen for you and I, and we've got some more staff coming on board to help us this summer to really contribute in that area. So I'm really excited for that. And maybe the last final thing then, if people want to get involved, you mentioned PGR committee, how can people connect with you around advocacy? Maybe we'll end it on that.
Yeah, so I say this as often as I can, but my email is vsingh@bramptonbot.com. Seriously, reach out to me and let me know your thoughts. And should you want to join a PGR committee, or get involved in some other way, or come to one of our events or roundtables that we're putting on, feel free to reach out. And I'm looking to take the summer to do a lot of listening and understanding, again, what these issues are, and prepare as much as possible for this 1-year road to the municipal election. So please feel free to email me or follow us on Instagram at Brampton BOT, and LinkedIn, Brampton Board of Trade, and all of our social medias. And I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
I'm super excited. Yeah. Honestly, this is the thing looking forward that I'm most amped about. We've done some really great work this past year. I think you have a lot to be proud of. But I think this is going to be the thing where we're really going to be able to leave our imprint on the next 4 years of our city to come after it. So absolutely. To me, it's not just here's an opportunity to do a thing. This is a thing that's going to have real ripples, hopefully in a positive way, if we do our work well. So I'm really excited for that.
That's right.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening. Appreciate the time, and we'll see you in the next one. And thank you once again to the Honey Badgers. All right. Take care.
Bye.